In Carrying Arms Chapter X, I want to change. How could this happen? Yahuba ducked away, avoiding a glinting black blade as it sailed overhead, nearly taking his head off in the process. How could this fucking happen? The onslaught continued. The kid's ruby orbs burned ferociously, a determination unlike any other flickering in his fiery gaze. His red-tinted hair fluttered in the wind as he moved, as he teared forward at superhuman speeds, barely a blur to the untrained eye. He moved through a set of breathing forms, blade held high as he struck with enough force to slice deep into Yahuba's chest, a splatter of blood left in his wake. Yahuba howled in agony, stretching his hands forward. The eyes on his palms blinked, and the kid was pushed away by an invisible force. The boy grunted, sent soaring through the trunk of a tree. A soundless gasp escaped his lips. He collapsed to the ground, but only momentarily. Because almost instantly, he picked himself up from the dirt and shot forward once more. No, no, no. Another set of blinks followed, but this time, the boy avoided them, seeing right through the crimson arrows as they approached him, courtesy of the paper talisman placed on his forehead. Yahuba gritted his teeth. He too moved back, putting distance between himself and the boy. He was not going to die today. Not when he was so close to winning Master Musen's approval. Damn it. Damn it. If only Susumaru had been here, then they would have won this battle. But no. She was nowhere to be found. Gone missing for weeks. Yahuba leapt away as the Hanafuda boy drew closer, body and sword twisting in his direction. Barely. He barely avoided a swing that would have decapitated him. Instead, the sword only sliced half of his neck, spraying blood into the air. Yahuba jumped sideways before the boy could change direction, and headed to the front of Tamayo's destroyed clinic. Once there, he could barely contain his rage. Useless, he hissed, choking on blood as the wound on his neck healed. You're all useless. 3 demons, recently created by Master Musen, were being held back by the demon girl with a muzzle in her mouth. She was holding her own against the trio, even as she protected Tamayo the fugitive and a young-looking male demon. It was all wrong. Everything had gone wrong. Not only had he lost to a child, but he was also filthy, caked with mounds upon mounds of dirt. He shuddered with disgust. And as he turned around, he could see the demon slayer boy rushing his way once more, blade held to the side. Ready to finish the job. In that moment, Yahuba decided to flee. Without Susumaru's help, it wasn't worth it to keep fighting, and he certainly wasn't going to die here, covered in blood and filth. He stretched out his palms, but not toward the boy. He directed his ability at the demon girl and sent her flying into the clinic behind her. Nezuko. As expected, the boy faltered, concerned for his companion as she was violently thrown by that irresistible force. This gave Yahuba time to run. Time to escape from this nightmare. He turned tail and sprinted away, putting as much distance between himself and that boy. The sun would be rising soon. He could feel it. And suddenly, Yahuba was in a panic as he ran. He couldn't return to Lord Musen empty-handed. No, that meant certain death. So, he had to come back with something, with someone. Anyone. Yahuba growled with frustration. In one last desperate attempt, he used his ability again. And he found a trail. Susumaru's trail. Utter shock flooded his veins. It was faint, but he could still sense it. Her aura was here, or at least, it had been here. Most likely, she'd been at this very clinic weeks ago. He hadn't noticed it earlier. But because his senses were heightened by battle, and adrenaline still pumped through him, finding her was actually possible. With the eyes on his palms, he followed a faint trace in the night, a distinct trail characteristic of his partner. However, if he truly focused, something about Susumaru felt different. It was something he couldn't quite ascertain. Her presence was mixed with not only Lord Musen's blood, but with another. A presence just as potent as his master. This was it. This was the reason he'd had so much trouble finding her. Her trail was not the same as before. And upon realizing this, a sense of foreboding slipped into his stomach. Nevertheless, Yahuba pressed forward as fast as he could, intent on finding his partner before the sun began to rise. Hours earlier, Asakusa, even though the sun had set, people still flooded the streets. There were thousands of them, dressed in kimonos and yukatas, as well as modern attire. They moved along a broad walkway, some busy, some having a leisurely stroll. Children pulled their parents along to different food stands, dead set on eating their favorite meals. Couples held hands as they walked, enjoying the bright lights and towering buildings that marked Japan's rapid industrialization. It never ceased to fascinate him just how far this country had come. Not long ago, the notion of mechanical machines powered by gasoline was unheard of, a fantasy, even. But now, not only did dozens of these vehicles move along the road, but many others, such as trolleys, carrying dozens of passengers, glided upon glinting, silver rails. The sound was deafening, yet strangely alluring. Muzan could still remember when a good stallion was the fastest mode of transportation. Back then, owning a horse was a privilege, a sign of one's wealth. He recalled the days of his youth, fraught with illness and frailty. This was during the Heian period, a time filled with art and culture and endless power struggles for the title of emperor. Next came the feudal period of Japan, spanning hundreds of years, marked by warfare, destruction, and the reign of the samurai. Then came the early modern era of the Edo period, consisting of relative stability across the nation. And finally, each and every era culminated into the current period of modernization and technological advancement. So much time. He'd seen it pass by. Not quite in a blink, but quick enough to surprise him. Even with his longevity, time still marched on, the seasons still changed, and the world still evolved. For 1,000 years, he had chosen not to interfere with Japanese politics. Instead, he'd focused on a single thing, a solution to his one weakness. Because his true philosophy was to achieve a state of permanence, where nothing, especially him, ever changed. To not be altered by time. To remain in a prime state, unaffected by the sun, unafraid of death itself. This was perfection in his eyes, and something he desired above all others. Yet, a question remained. When he finally conquered the sun, what next? Since the Heian period, he'd worked in the shadows, creating countless demons with hopes that one of them would either find the blue spider lily, or evolve to resist the sunlight. He'd focused entirely on perfecting himself, and thus ignored the humans as they altered the country around him. This goal of his had been so all-consuming that he rarely stopped to consider what would occur after he shed off his one weakness. Should he rule Japan? The world? These questions rattled in his ancient mind. Darling. Her voice barely reached him as he mused, the sound of the crowd dull to his ears. Still, Rei persisted, wrapping her hands around his arm. Hanako held him tighter, her tiny arms clinging to his shoulders as they walked. Tsukiko, are you listening to me? Muzan's eyes snapped to her, a pulse of annoyance filling him as she dragged him from his thoughts. She didn't seem to notice, or care, looking up at him with those big brown eyes. Rei didn't fear him. She never had. Not even slightly. And this mystified him. Even after being in his presence for so long, she still gazed at him in that loving manner. Most of his previous partners, given enough time, started to become uneasy, wary of his disposition. The paleness of his skin. His odd need to stay indoors during the day. But not her. She rarely questioned it. Never thought to pry, even when they first met. I have a skin condition, he'd told her. And she never broached the subject again. A welcome change when compared to past relationships. If she'd continued to question it, however, he would have killed her on the spot. However, fortunately for her, she had been intuitive enough to keep her mouth shut. "Sorry, Rei," he finally said, smiling. "I was distracted." "A lot on your mind?" she asked gently. "Yes," Muzan replied. "My project has been stagnant lately. 3 of my colleagues left the business for good. All this in the span of one night." Though he was being cryptic about what he shared, Muzan was still surprised he was telling her any of this. "I see. That's unfortunate." She pulled him closer. "Is there anything I can do? My family has the resources. I could fund more of your research if you want." He glanced at her, another smile on his lips. "That's quite all right, Rei. It's not a problem money can solve. I appreciate the offer, though." "Okay." She intertwined her hand with his as they weaved through the throng of people. "Just know that I'm here if you need anything." "Of course, darling." Hanako, who had been so busy observing the tall buildings of Asakusa, finally cut in. "Me too, father," she added cheerfully. "I'm also here to help if you need anything." Muzan held her gently, chuckling. "Well, I appreciate it, Hana. I'll be sure to remember that when I need something." At that, Hanako titled her head, asking innocently, "So how long will we be in Tokyo?" Muzan wanted to respond, but before he spoke, someone gripped him by the shoulder. It was a grip so harsh, so hostile, that his anger flared in an instant. Muzan paused, then turned, eyes flashing crimson. He met the gaze of a young teen, checkered haori fluttering, Nichiren blade at his side. Time seemed to freeze. They locked gazes. The king of demons. And this lone boy. The first thing he noticed was the symbol on his forehead. A demon slayer mark? No. No. It was just a scar. Still, as Muzan's eyes roamed the features of this bold demon slayer, he instantly caught sight of the one thing that chilled him to the bone. Hanafuda earrings. Memories of his defeat 400 years ago came flooding back. He gritted teeth, arteries bulging along his face. This child almost resembled Yoriichi, the only demon slayer to ever best him in battle. Could he be responsible for killing my lower moons? Again, no, that was unlikely. Along with sensing their deaths, he had seen glimpses of their last moments as well, all of which involved a woman with purple-tinted hair and a blonde man with their battle occurring outside of Tokyo. Muzan could feel a growl rising in his throat. This wasn't the time to be caught. He didn't need demon slayers knowing his location. Not now. He needed a distraction. "Father," asked Hanako. "Who's that?" "Perfect. Good girl." "Don't worry, Hanako," he replied warmly, seizing this opportunity. "Everything's fine." The Hanafuda body froze, hand on the hilt of his sword. Seeing Muzan holding a human girl, hearing her name, shook him to the core, and he almost seemed to want to vomit at the sight. "Who is this boy?" asked Rei. "I really don't know. I'm just as confused as you are," he said. "I've never seen him before, in fact." As he spoke, Muzan's claws sharpened, and he found his next distraction. "He must have made a mistake, thought that I was someone else." In that moment, faster than a normal person could track, he scratched an unsuspecting man's neck, injecting moderate amounts of blood into his body. Chaos ensued. The crowd roared in alarm as the Hanafuda boy tackled the man he'd just recently turned into a demon, restraining him. The man growled and drooled, acclimating to his blood almost instantly. He fought against the young demon slayer, trashing beneath a powerful hold. Hanako teared up at the sight, snuggling closer into his chest. Unbidden, Muzan felt a pang of concern for his no, for Rei's child. He held her tightly, shielding her from the sight. "Don't look, okay," he whispered tenderly. "Rei, I think we should go. It's not safe. Rei nodded quickly and followed after him, and they left the scene, the crowd parting as more people gathered to watch the bizarre scene unfolding in the middle of the street. Muzan Kibutsuji. The Hanafuda slayer screamed at the top of his lungs. Muzan frowned. He knows who I am. What's the matter with that boy, Tsukiyako? He barely registered her voice. Instead, he listened to the desperate yells of the boy in question. My blade will be the last thing you see. I'll never forgive you for what you've done. Muzan's eyes narrowed as his words were finally drowned out by the crowd. Holding Hanako tightly, he took the lead and went as far away as possible, stopping only when he found a cab to take Rei and Hanako home. You're not coming with us, father, she asked sadly. He handed her over to Rei. No, I have work to do. I have to attend a boring old business meeting soon. Plus, I'm worried about what just happened. Darling, Rei protested. The concern in her eyes was palpable. Don't worry. I'm just going to check in with the police. He smiled warmly. Now, get in. They complied, albeit reluctantly. Muzan gazed upon them for a time. He decided in that moment to finally part ways with them. This makeshift family had served their purpose. And now, with demon slayers encroaching on Tokyo, coupled by the recent deaths of the lower moons, he had every reason to leave this place for the foreseeable future, especially when he just encountered someone that wore the same earrings as Yoriichi. So, this was it. He would leave Tokyo tonight, but not after sending someone after that boy. He smiled with as much care as he could muster, eyes lingering on Rei and Hanako one last time. Muzan almost chuckled. They were the only humans in these pretend relationships that he hadn't ended up devouring or outright killing. Muzan stepped aside and let the cab take them away. Hanako waved at him as they moved further and further away. He kept a smile on his face until they were out of sight. Then an enraged frown marred his features. He turned to the nearest alleyway, fists clenching as thoughts of Yoriichi filled his mind. Along with the deaths of the lower moons, this boy's appearance was very troubling. Yahuba's report 3 weeks ago indicated that a battle had occurred in Naruma, then moved outside of the city, where all 3 of his demons were eliminated. In all his years, multiple Kazuki, upper, even lower, had never been killed in one night. It was unheard of, completely unlikely. Not only that, but why? Why had they all gathered in a single place without his permission? Of course, he gave them the freedom to roam Japan as they saw fit, but what was the reason for them clustering in one area without consulting him first? As soon as he entered the alley, Muzan snapped a finger. Nakame's Biwa resounded. Yahuba appeared before him, kneeling down. Muzan arched a brow. You still haven't found your partner. And no. Curiosity, rather than anger, filled his being. For some reason, when he tried to summon Yahuba's partner with Nakame's blood demon art, it didn't work. Almost as though there was some kind of interference. Never mind, then. There was no time for this nonsense. He glanced ahead, watching as 3 drunks stumbled their way. 2 men. And 1 woman. They would have to do for now. In a blur, he moved forward, scratching all 3 of them before they even realized what was happening. He injected a decent amount of blood into their bodies, and a moment later, they fell to the floor, twitching and spasming as they instantly transformed into demons. Good. They acclimated well. Their physicality was decent, too. Enough for an impromptu assignment. He turned to Yahuba. There's a demon slayer that wears Hanafuda earrings nearby. Take these 3, find him, and kill him. A simple order, one that he expected to be followed without question. Yes, master, said Yahuba. Muzan turned to the newly made demons. They were on their knees, drooling as they stared up at him, waves of pleasure still running through their bodies. If you succeed, I'll give you more of my blood. Their eyes widened, their shivering increased. They nodded vigorously. Even as new demons, they were wise enough to understand who their master was. Muzan turned away without another word, intent on leaving Tokyo for good. These recent events did not sit well with him, and as such, he would be summoning every single member of the 12 Kazuki tomorrow, both upper and lower, to discuss his plans for the future. He snapped his finger once more, and he was instantly transported into Nakame's dimension. Present-time Naruto stifled a yawn as he opened the door. He raised his arms in a back-arching stretch, a cup of tea in his hand. The morning air was cool against his skin, and though the sun had yet to rise, the garden was bright and visible, tinted silver by lamps and a glistening, silent moon. He paused to inspect his home, as well as the demon sitting on that bench a distance away. She had a book in her hand, a black cat on her lap. But she wasn't reading. Instead, she was looking up, smiling to herself. She observed the beautiful sky above, littered with glowing stars that would soon be swallowed by the morning sun. Naruto's gaze lingered on Susumaru. She seemed content, calm, perhaps even happy. However, if he looked close enough, there was a longing, a yearning in her ember eyes. A yearning for something just beyond her reach. Something she had not seen in decades. The sun, Naruto realized. She missed the sun. A pang of sympathy rushed through him. As cheerful and carefree as she was, Susumaru still had moments like these. Moments of weakness and vulnerability. They hadn't known each other for too long, but he still wanted to help her. He found that he genuinely cared about her. Try as he might to shut out the people of this world, they still found their way into his heart. First, Tamayo, then Yushiro, then Yuichiro, followed by Susumaru, and now, Murata, Ozaki, Kaneo, and Shinobu. It had been 3 weeks since she departed. So far, things had been relatively peaceful. As Shinobu had promised, a few demon slayers had passed through the district. No one particularly notable though. There hadn't been any more demon attacks either, especially in Nerima. That was a good sign, because in 1 week, he, Susumaru, and Yuichiro would receive directions to the demon slayers' secret headquarters. That is, if they were first approved to come. But Shinobu had been confident that her master would allow them to visit for at least a few days. So, all that remained was to wait for Shinobu's crow to arrive. Naruto made his way over to his friend, who stopped her stargazing when he drew near. Susumaru smiled when she saw him, eyes glinting happily. At this point, he trusted her enough that she could stay outside without him needing to watch over her. Which meant more sleep for him. Of course, he could always have a clone stay with her, but sometimes Susumaru declined, on the account of not wanting to bother him with the rush of unimportant memories when the clone finally dispelled. "Mornin'," Naruto greeted. He took a sip of tea. "Good morning, Naruto." Susumaru grinned, expression shifting. "You're up early." He took a seat next to her. True. But I had to make sure you weren't up to no good." Susumaru laughed. "I wouldn't dare. I don't want my ribs and spine broken again." She was referring to their first meeting over a month ago. Naruto recalled that night with a wince. "Sorry," he said after a moment. "Now that I think about it, I might have gone overboard back then." The demon waved him off. "I'm over it, Naruto." "Really?" She reached down and stroked Kimiko's dark fur. The cat purred in response. "After all, if you hadn't knocked some sense into me, I wouldn't have gotten to know you and Yuichiro. In fact, I'd probably be dead if I never chased you down that night." "You think so?" Naruto inquired. She shrugged. "Who knows? Aside from the 12 Kazuki, lower-level demons are always being killed by demon slayers. All things considered, I really could be dead right now." Naruto leaned back on the bench and placed his cup on the ground. A playful smile curled across his lips. Well, then I'm glad I beat you up that night. Wow. Such disrespect. Susumaru smirked. Is that how you talk to your elders? Elder? He chuckled. You. Technically, I am older than you. You certainly don't act like it. She shrugged. You don't act your age, either. At least, that's what Yuichiro always says. Naruto laughed once more. If anything's certain, he acts like an old man. Susumaru giggled, nodding in agreement. Yuichiro was the youngest between the three of them, but honestly, the clinic would be chaos without his attention to detail and incredible organizational skills. He sort of reminds me of someone. She added softly, her laughter dying down. He noticed a shift in her demeanor. Someone. Susumaru suddenly looked sad. My partner, Yahuba, she said. He and I would always be assigned to missions together. We were one of the few instances where demons were allowed to work together for such a long period of time. She frowned. I feel like I've abandoned him. A flood of guilt welled up within her. Honestly, she hadn't even thought about him for so long. Naruto listened to her with sympathetic eyes. Where is he right now? She frowned. I don't know. We were always being summoned to different places by that man. So, he could be anywhere, or even dead. The blonde shinobi hummed in thought. You want to find him? A statement. An assumption. But Susumaru thought for a moment, reluctantly shaking her head. I don't know. He's not one to listen to a different perspective. And he's fiercely loyal to that man. Like I was. It was strange. After all this time, why was she now remembering him? Perhaps he was close by. Compared to the volatile relationships between demons, he was actually a friend. A companion. As annoying as Yahuba could be always complaining about dirt, or filth, he had been a constant in her life for years. He was someone like her. Someone turned into a demon at a young age. Perhaps, if she could change, he could as well. She wanted to convince him. Susumaru frowned. Then again, who knew what Yahuba would try to do to Naruto or Yuichiro if he found out she had left Muzan for good. While she cared about him, anyone who tried to hurt her family would be beaten into a bloody pulp. Wait. Family. She glanced at Naruto. Were they a family? Her, Naruto, Yuichiro, and Kimiko? Could that be possible? The thought made warmth spread through her belly. Like butterflies fluttering in an enclosed space. Her cheeks burned, her mind drifting to what family entailed. Especially between her and the blonde doctor sitting beside her. For a moment, she wondered if Naruto felt the same. By the way, Susumaru. Where is Muzan? Huh? Susumaru faltered, torn from her fantasy by Naruto's sudden question. Kimiko protested as Susumaru whirled around to face him. What? Naruto looked calm, crossing his arms. Where is Muzan Kibutsuji? He repeated nonchalantly. Do you know? Why do you want to know? A feeling of dread filled her heart. Surely, he wasn't considering. So I can go kill him, of course. He said those words so confidently that she could hardly believe what she was hearing. Sure, Naruto was powerful. More powerful than any human she had ever met. He'd defeated 3 lower moons on his own, saving dozens in the process. And she was convinced that he could take on the upper moons as well. But Muzan was a different story. He was over 1,000 years old, and by far the strongest demon on Earth. Even Naruto had his limits, right? He was still human, after all. Susumaru nearly stood to her feet. No. No. She nodded firmly, brows furrowing. I can't let you. You'll be killed. And, And I don't want that to happen. I can't let that happen. Naruto's eyes softened. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Relax, he said. I wasn't serious. Sorry for worrying you. Her shoulders slumped. It's okay. It's just. We can't lose you, you know. His gaze widened a fraction, genuine surprise on his face. A part of me is just annoyed, Naruto admitted. This Muzan has caused so much pain to those I care about. Someone needs to kick his ass already. Well, it's not like I know where he is anyway, she replied. Tentatively, Susumaru scooted closer. He's a master of disguise. If he wills it, no demon can find him. He can change his appearance, his voice, his mannerisms, even his malice. He has a special demon that's used to summon us from all over Japan, someone that plays a biwa. She leaned back on the bench, running pale fingers through Kimiko's fur. So I genuinely don't know where he is right now. Okay. I understand. Naruto took in her explanation thoughtfully, even as they slipped into a serene silence. Again, he had to remind himself that this wasn't his fight. He would help, if needed, but it wasn't his responsibility to seek out every threat lingering in the distance. Even if that threat was Muzan Kibutsuji. The comfortable silence was broken by Naruto's sigh. Not only did he have returning home to worry about, but also the demon by his side, as well as his younger brother, Yuichiro. This was the price of opening his heart to the people of this world. Yet he couldn't complain. They were precious to him, they had added many things to his life, many good and treasured things, and he would never change that even if given the chance. You all right? Susumaru asked, glancing his way. Naruto smiled gently. I'm fine. She observed him closely. Are you thinking about home? Sort of. He admitted. I get it, she said. It's been years since you left. It must be hard, having to leave your country behind. They were so close, she could feel the incredible warmth radiating from him. We were at war, then, Naruto revealed quietly. The worst in our history. Thousands died. I lost so many of my friends. The land was ravaged beyond recognition. And against my will, I was taken to this foreign place called Japan. It was the first time he mentioned anything of substance about his homeland. Susumaru listened intently. She wasn't an expert on the geopolitical climate of the planet, but she did know that the world had experienced much conflict in recent times, especially with nations of the West. So perhaps he was from one of those countries, recently torn apart by horrible wars. She wanted to ask more questions. Wanted to find out about where he came from. But this wasn't the time. Gazing at him, she saw the conflicted look that crossed his features when he spoke about home. He was so young. Yet he had so much on his plate. So much to worry about. The pressure would break most people, but he always managed to smile. For them. Gently, she snaked her arms around his waist and gave him a big hug. Heart pounding, she held him close. As tightly as she could. He didn't resist, relaxing into her touch. It felt perfect. Felt right. And Susumaru realized that she loved this. She loved being by his side. Listening to him. Talking to him. No matter where he went, whether he chose to stay in Japan, or leave, she would follow. Susumaru wanted to hug him forever, but the sun would be rising soon. She'd have to go inside for today. She'd have to let chills ran down her spine in that moment. Susumaru stiffened, a familiar feeling washing over her just as the gates of the clinic were blown off their hinges, sent flying toward her and Naruto. Tanjiro stooped down and collected the blood of a demon through a syringe. Then he cut off her head, ending the woman's life. He looked on sadly, watched as her body turned to ash in moments, disintegrating and floating into the early morning sky. It was still dark. Dust covered what was once Tamayo's clinic. The building had collapsed in on itself, utterly ruined by those three demons while he'd been fighting the Arrow one. Tanjiro clenched his fists. It had been a hard-fought battle, but the Arrow demon had managed to escape. Instead of facing defeat, he chose to flee, hurling Nezuko away as a distraction, as a means to get away. My body hurts. He'd never been in this much pain. A rib must have been fractured, and it hurt to even stand. Yet the fact that he was still alive, the fact he'd been able to best all four demons, meant that he was becoming strong. Strong enough to protect others. Strong enough to find a cure for his sister. Safely capping the syringe, he handed it over to Tamayo. The older demon had been quiet for some time, just staring at her destroyed home. Years of building. Years of amassed materials. All destroyed in moments. By the looks of things, only a few items could be salvaged, and an expression of deep sadness marred the beautiful woman's face. Her ward, Yashiro, placed a soothing hand on her shoulder. It's done, Tanjiro said. Holding the syringe close, Tamayo sighed. Thank you, Tanjiro. Though unfortunately, these demons were not members of the 12 Kizuki. In fact, they only seemed to have been recently transformed. Recently transformed, the teen asked. Yes. Muzan must have been in a rush, Tamayo speculated. He gave them copious amounts of blood, hoping to create strong demons. But they were strong, Miss Tamayo, Tanjiro added. Strong, yet unstable. Their minds couldn't handle the transformation well, and they were even more violent and deformed than normal demons. Tamayo paused, thinking. Perhaps Naruto killing 3 lower moons had put Muzan on edge enough for him to do something so impulsive and ill-planned. Nevertheless, despite her home being reduced to rubble, a burst of satisfaction swelled in her chest. Naruto's encounter with members of the 12 must have rattled the leader of all demons. And she couldn't help but delight in this speculation. Tamayo glanced to a section of their home. A section where Nezuko was seated. The muzzled demon struggled to stay awake, drifting in and out of sleep. She'd taken the brunt of the Arrow demon's final attack, her body flung about dozens of times through the air. Next to Nezuko was another demon, a man Muzan had turned in front of Tanjiro in the middle of Asakusa. As a recently transformed demon, he had little control over his impulses. Therefore, he was bound head to toe in special ropes that restricted his movements. Even so, the man's wife was by his side. The very woman he had bitten nearly killed still chose to stay with him. Luckily, Yashiro had been able to pull the wife from the rubble once the clinic began to collapse. Tamayo quickly made her way to them. She checked on Nezuko first, before affectionately stroking the girl's pale cheek. You did well tonight, Tamayo whispered. Nezuko seemed to understand, because she immediately wrapped her arms around Tamayo's neck in a tight hug, which the older woman returned with a soft smile. Then she moved on to the man and his wife. Are you all right? Tamayo asked the woman. I don't know, she replied. Her yellow kimono was still stained with blood. Her shoulder was covered in bandages, the very same shoulder her husband had bitten. Tonight, I found out demons are real. And that my husband was turned into one. It's overwhelming. Gazing upon her with kind eyes, Tamayo said, Look. I can make you forget about this. About him. Her blood demon art, supernatural blood, allowed her to affect sentient life by scratching herself and drawing blood. She could cause hallucinations, illusions, hypnotism, or alter perception and even brain chemistry. The effects were much more pronounced in humans. So, if she truly wanted to, Tamayo could make this woman forget everything that happened tonight, even going as far as altering her memories of her husband, now turned demon. It's okay, the woman said. I'll stay with him until you find a way to cure him, no matter how long it takes. Tamayo nodded. Very well. With the man under her spell, he should be harmless for the time being. A moment later, Tanjiro approached them. Nezuko quickly stood up and ran to embrace her brother. "What will you do now, Miss Tamayo?" Tanjiro asked, holding his sister. "Yashiro and I will be leaving this region. We're too close to Kibutsuji now. They'd been in Asakusa for decades now. It would be painful to leave. But before that, I'm going to pay a friend a visit." Tanjiro tilted his head. "A friend?" She nodded. "He lives on the outskirts of Tokyo, several hours from here. Shorter, if you run." Tamayo smiled softly. "If possible, I really want you to meet him before leaving the city. And this friend of yours, he's aware of demons." Tanjiro held Nezuko's hand. "I wouldn't want to startle him." "Yes, he's aware. He knows the truth about me and Yashiro. In fact, he lives with a demon as well." Tanjiro's eyes widened at that. "I can help with some of your injuries, but he'll be able to heal you completely. Are you okay to travel?" Though pain shot up his ribs, Tanjiro nodded. "I can manage." "Good," she said. "Take your time getting there. There's no rush. He'll welcome you with open arms. And most importantly, he might have some information on the 12 Kizuki as well." At the mention of the 12, Tanjiro's resolve was strengthened. With every mission, he came closer and closer to helping Nezuko. A light. He gripped the hilt of his sword. "I'll head there now. Will you be coming?" "Later," Tamayo answered. "The sun is about to rise, and Yashiro and I still need to gather what's left in the basement. We'll stop by tonight." Tanjiro nodded. His crow hadn't come to give him a new mission yet, so he had time to investigate this new lead. He stooped down and opened Nezuko's box. Even without prompting, his sister shrunk down until she was small enough to fit inside. "Let me take a look at you before you leave," said Tamayo. She bandaged any bleeding wounds, giving him a once-over when she was finished. She gave him directions to Naruto's clinic as well. Still, Tanjiro was concerned. "Will you be okay? I can stay with you. Don't worry." She waved him off. "Take care. I'll see you again tonight." Tamayo paused. "And one more thing, Tanjiro. Keep Nezuko close." Tanjiro tilted his head. "Naruto has very special blood," she explained. "Nezuko's not like normal demons, so she might not be affected. But I just felt you should know this about him." "Okay." Tanjiro gave a single nod, turned, then left, set on finding Tamayo's friend as soon as possible before he was called away for another mission. The massive black gates, sent soaring toward Naruto, were deflected by a large, rotating sphere of air. They bounced off the rapidly spinning winds, landing on either end of his property with a resounding crash. Yahaba burst into the garden like a madman, desperate to find his partner as morning drew closer and closer. He'd followed it. Her footsteps, her lingering aura. He'd bet his life on it, risking certain death in the sunlight. Using his eyes, he'd stuck to that faint trail, that distinct feeling only she could bring. A feeling so scant that he doubted even Lord Muzan could find her. And it all paid off, this hunch of his. Because she was here. She was actually here. In this garden. At this home. Yahaba didn't like to open his normal eyes. Usually, he opted to use the ones on his palms, having the other pair remain shut. Keeping his upper eyes closed was comforting. Not physically, but mentally. Shutting his eyes reminded him of his days as a human, of being a child. Of being blind and helpless, of groping around in the dark, protected by his mother and father. This time was different. Foregoing his discomfort, he chose to open both eyes, peach-colored gaze locking on the demon he'd worked with for some years. She caught sight of him as well, amber orbs growing wide as he slowed to halt in front of her. Yahaba. She was still alive. Still the same Susumaru. But then again, she wasn't the same. No, he realized. Something about her was different. Something so subtle, yet so profound that couldn't comprehend what it was. Her hair was slightly longer. And her eyes a bit brighter. She wasn't wearing her typical orange kimono. Instead, she wore black pants, the same dark sarashi around her chest, and an orange haori. Seeing her, whole and well, sent a shiver of relief through him, but also a spark of anger. "You idiot," he hissed. "I worried. I I thought you were dead." "Really? You were worried? About me? Wow. I didn't know you had it in you." Opening with a joke. Different. Yet still the same Susumaru. "As much as I hate to admit it, yes, I was worried," Yahuba said quietly. Susumaru's features softened. "Sorry." It was then that he noticed the man standing beside his partner. He'd been so focused on finding her that this person's presence had barely registered in his mind. He glanced at the blonde male with a mixture of confusion and disinterest. Why is Susumaru with a human? And why was he suddenly feeling jittery with a desire to feed on this human? A pulse ran through him. His body began to shake, and his mouth began to water, and he turned to face the blonde with wide, hungry eyes. What was this? He'd never felt like this before. All he wanted to do now was pounce and feast like he'd never done before. His mind was in a haze, his breathing becoming more and more shallow, bolts of desire sparking through every fiber of his being. By the time he got some semblance of control, Susumaru was stepping in front of the human, almost as if to protect him. Who is this person, Susumaru? She'd put herself between them. And she didn't seem to want to eat him, either. Just what on earth was going on? "The name's Naruto," the human interjected. His brow twitched with annoyance. "That gate cost a lot of money, you know. And you just knocked it down." "Gate?" Yahuba growled. "Who cares about a stupid gate? Susumaru, what is happening? Why is there a human behind you?" "Yahuba." Susumaru's features were gentle yet determined. "He's not just any human. He's the one that saved me." Confusion colored his face. "Saved you? From what?" "From the life I used live. From that man." "That man? You mean the master?" Yahuba was at a loss. He could not comprehend what was happening. Susumaru was someone just as loyal to Muzan as he was. They'd made it their goal to win his approval to reach the highest level of the 12 Kizuki. Yet here she was, claiming she'd been saved from the master. "You're confused. Something must have happened." Yahuba's gaze shot to the blonde beside her. "He's responsible. He did something to you, didn't he? Deceived you, most likely." She remained calm. A small smile curled across her lips. "He did no such thing. And he's not threatening me, if that's what you think. He's no demon slayer, either." She really was different. That playful glint hadn't left her ember eyes. But she seemed more mature. More refined. "What happened to you? Enough of this nonsense. Come with me, now. The master will be concerned that I haven't returned yet." Her smile suddenly turned sad. "He won't. He doesn't care about us, Yahuba." A burst of rage welled up within him, so much so that the human slid into a stance ready to attack. "Doesn't care about us, have you lost your mind?" Yahuba yelled. Veins bulged along his body. "The master's blood, his kindness is the reason that we are alive. He's the reason I'm no longer blind. Most demons forgot their origin save for a select few. He was one of those few. He remembered bits of who he was before, pieces, just enough." Her visage grew firm. "No, Yahuba. He's the reason there's so much suffering in Japan. He didn't save us. His blood made us into murderous monsters. The kind that harms innocent people without remorse. And sure, our childhoods weren't the best. But that's no excuse for the things we've done. Enough, he was losing his temper. This wasn't like him. Normally, she was the impulsive one. However, here he was, screaming like a petulant child. I failed my mission. The sun is coming up soon. I can't leave here without you. He won't be pleased. I need to bring something back to him, anything. He was quaking with fear. If I bring you back at least, it will surely appease him. Susumaru frowned. I'm telling you. He doesn't care. You failed your mission. Even if you brought me with you, he'll only kill us both. That's not true. He no longer had control. He relies on us. He made us members of the 12 Kizuki for a reason. He lied, Susumaru pressed. A twinge of sadness echoed in her voice. I've seen members of the 12. They're different. They're powerful. Even the lower moons. You can just feel their strength. She gritted her teeth, angered at being deceived. We were never part of the 12. No. You're the one that's lying. All this while, Naruto had been quiet. He'd been watching them, giving them the space to air their grievances. Sure, he wasn't exactly thrilled with this Yahuba breaking down his gate, but this was Susumaru's fight. He wouldn't step in unless necessary. The sun would be rising in several minutes. So, this confrontation wasn't going to last for much longer. However, it was the sound of the door opening that made Naruto's concern grow. Normally, this was the time when his student liked to wake up and begin setting up the clinic for the day. Naruto turned as Yuichiro stepped outside, rubbing at sleep-heavy eyes. What's happening? Yuichiro yawned deeply. What's all this noise? Seeing the younger teen, Yahuba's anger soared to new heights. It's these humans, isn't it? He hissed. Maybe if I got rid of them, you'll come to your senses. The demon stretched out palms that contained emerald eyeballs. 2 blinks followed, and Naruto instantly felt a number of forces tugging at his entire body. Thinking fast, he applied chakra to his feet, resisting this strange energy as it tried to throw him away. It worked, because moments later, the force dissipated, moving past him. He was fine. The same couldn't be said for Yuichiro. Naruto turned and saw his student being carried 20 feet above the clinic, launched into the air by that same force. Shit. Unbridled rage marred Susumaru's features. Naruto, however, was already moving. He remained calm, muscles tensing. He shot forward into the sky, a blur in the night. He met Yuichiro in the air, reaching out to him with open arms. Shaken, but otherwise fine, Yuichiro embraced Naruto, and they gently floated back down to earth, aided by a wind jutsu to cushion the fall. You okay? They landed, and the teen grumbled. I should know better than to expect a pleasant morning with you two around. A witty remark. He was okay then, thankfully. Naruto placed his student down gently, then turned to face the demon in front of them. He was ready to rip him apart. But by the looks of things, Susumaru was already ahead of him. The Tamari came flying faster than the speed of sound. A crack. Like lightning. A sonic boom. Yahuba could hardly react, could hardly move as the ball punched through a portion of his side. Pain. Blood bubbled from his stomach, surging up his mouth. It was so fast. Too fast. She'd never been able to throw her weapons this quickly before. Gritting his teeth, Yahuba stretched forth both palms as another volley of Tamari came his way. 3 of them this time, each moving at supersonic speeds. He was ready. Several blinks, and each ball was sent back toward her. Susumaru's eyes narrowed. With a thought, she released the technique, and her Tamari disappeared before they could hit her. Damn. 5 blinks. He sent dozens of arrows her way, hoping to catch her and toss her aside. She reacted quickly, weaving past each projectile. She avoided it, sure, but he made certain to aim the arrows at the blonde behind her as well. However, unlike last time, the blonde anticipated his arrows. Grabbing the younger human by his side, Naruto resisted the red vectors with ease. By the time Yahuba returned his attention to Susumaru, she was already upon him. She had a tamari in her hand. But not quite. It floated just above her palm. And it was spinning. Faster. Faster. Faster than anything he'd ever seen. It was glowing, too. Amber, just like her eyes. The tamari was now like a ball of fire. No, like a ball of energy. It almost seemed like she was holding the sun in her palm, a spinning, flaming sun. Before it hit, Yahuba already knew he'd lost. She'd become so powerful. Before her disappearance, they'd been relative to each other in strength. But now, she was leagues above him. Raise non. She whispered it. He barely heard her voice as she thrust her flaming, plasma-like tamari into his chest. It was agony. Unbridled agony. It drilled and drilled into him, disintegrated his ribs and internal organs. A blast wave of heat erupted around them, and Yahuba was suddenly flying. She aimed upward, so as to prevent damage to the clinic. His feet left the ground as he was launched into the sky. High above the garden. High above the clinic. Carried by a ball of plasma that still burned and burned, until it didn't. Finally, her rays non disappeared, leaving a massive hole in his chest and abdominal region. And he was falling. Without mercy. When Yahuba finally struck the ground, he shattered every bone in his body. Darkness enveloped him in moments. In that state of unconsciousness, memories flowed through him. Memories of being a child, memories of growing up blind. He recalled his father passing away early. Then his mother becoming ill. And he, a blind boy, had been forced to work to support his sick mother. He worked in various homes as a cleaner, obsessively keeping the homes of his clients tidy. He'd developed an aversion to filth, something that still impacted his behavior to this very day. Oh, how he hated filth. Because as a cleaner, a blind one, no less, his very livelihood was dependent on how well his work was done. He had to be better than others, dozens of times better, if he wanted to support both him and his sick mother. But one day, he'd been fired. He'd been let go by his last client on a cold, snowy night. Blind, without work, he had nothing. He couldn't help his mother. They would both starve. Then, he came along. Such a pitiful child. Hunched over in an alley, that man came to him. Do you want power? Shrouded by darkness, he could only hang on to Musen's every word. Do you want to see hope? A hope he'd longed for since birth. It had arrived on a silver platter. So, ignorant boy that he was, Yahuba took it. For his sake. For the sake of his mother. He became a demon for her benefit. If only he had sight, then he could find a good job. He could buy the medicine needed to keep her alive. His mother. The one who gave him life. In the end, he gained his sight. But killed his own mother. As he drifted back into a state of consciousness, Yahuba realized he could not move. His wounds were nearly healed. Yet he couldn't so much as twitch a muscle. Something was restricting him. A spell of sorts. He opened his upper eyes to a glinting moon. Two figures were standing over him. Susumaru. And this Naruto person. Susumaru looked at him sadly. With such empathy and care. The same was true of the blonde. He didn't seem too angry anymore, even after what he'd just done. His eyes were so gentle, too. His blood even more so. He's the reason she changed. It all made sense now. It was him. Yahuba let out a small, pained chuckle. You beat me. So easily. I did. Another laugh. Gentle. Defeated. Resigned to his fate. Then I suppose this is the end for me. Silence. Susumaru glanced at Naruto. Hopeful. Arms crossed, the blonde shrugged. It's up to you. So, she turned back to Yahuba with a sincere glint in her eyes. It doesn't have to be the end, Yahuba, she began tentatively. The pain subsided, and Yahuba asked, what do you mean? You can change, she said. Like I did. Like Miss Tamayo did. Change. Yeah. She smiled. A wonderful, beautiful smile. It's not too late. You can be different. You can atone. Still unable to move, he considered her words. Change. Atone. After all he'd done. After he'd taken his own mother's life. Was it right? Was it fair? What's done is done, Naruto said. His eyes weren't full of hatred, but they were hard, piercing. You can't alter the past. But the future is a different story. He looked up to the sky. The sun would be rising in minutes. The clouds were already tinted orange. Of course, you can choose to die. You can choose to escape the hard work needed to amend your sins. If you ask me though, that's the easy way out. What can I do? Yahuba asked softly, skeptically. What can I possibly do to atone? Hope swelled in Susumaru's chest. It was selfish, but she wanted him to live. She wanted him to know the beauty and pain of living to better oneself and the world. You can protect people from other demons, Susumaru answered. She looked him in the eyes. You can turn away from that man for good. Give your body, your cells. Help find a cure to our condition. So that no child ever has to go through what we did. That's a start. The rest should come in time. Protect humans. Turn away from Muzan. He might as well be signing a death sentence. Still, when he gazed at Susumaru, when he saw the peace on her face, the lack of fear, he thought that maybe, just maybe, he wanted to see what she saw. This man, this Naruto. Whoever he was, Yahuba could tell that he was special. And Susumaru was just as special. For being brave enough to change. So maybe he could do it too. For the first time in years, he could feel tears welling in his eyes. I want to change. That was all Naruto needed to hear. This won't be easy, you know. It wasn't easy for Susumaru, either. Naruto stooped down, taking a knee. But most importantly, you must promise me. Promise us. By now, even the younger teen that he just tried to hurt was watching the scene. You must promise to never harm a human again, Naruto continued. If you do, Susumaru added, if you lay even one finger on an innocent person, we'll see to it that your life ends. And it will hurt. Okay, Yahuba whispered. I promise. And one more thing, Susumaru continued. Yuichiro has to agree as well. If he's against this, we can't let you live. Everyone turned to the turquoise-tinted teen. He only shrugged. Do what you want. With you two freaks of nature here, I have nothing to worry about. It was settled. Naruto took out a kunao and sliced his palm deeply. Yahuba's eyes widened as the aroma filled his senses. Something so different from Muzan's. Something otherworldly. He drank steadily, savoring a taste of feeling like no other. This was it. His blood was enough to quench that burning hunger. As long as Naruto was here, he could change. For the better. When it was over, Yahuba felt satisfied for the first time since he was turned. The world suddenly seemed brighter. He also felt tired. So very tired. And Susumaru was hugging him, arms tightly around his shoulders. He shut his eyes and let her hold him. Whatever came next, he would face it head on. Yuichiro crossed his arms. Saving another one, huh, he whispered. Naruto looked at the two demons with gentle eyes. I suppose so. Well, out of the dozens upon dozens of demons he'd killed, saving two was still a pretty bad streak. An anomaly, for sure. You're such a softie, the teen said. Naruto chuckled, ruffling Yuichiro's turquoise locks. Don't worry. I'll make sure he apologizes for what he did. And he's gonna fix my damn gate. Whatever, Yuichiro said. As long as he doesn't try that again, I don't care. I trust you and Susumaru enough to know that I'll be safe. No matter what happens. Afternoon, Naruto's office running a business wasn't all roses. More so when that business dealt with human lives. There were many inspections he had to pass. There were also many things he had to document. Patient information and medical history were precious things, especially if some member of the city's government wanted to investigate his modest establishment. As much as liked to help those in need, Naruto also preferred to keep a low profile just like Tamayo. Which was why he chose an area at the furthest reaches of the city, away from prying eyes, but accessible enough for most. Thankfully, ever since he built this place a year ago, no one had thought to probe into his practice. But still, as head physician of the clinic, he had to make sure that everything was in order. His desk was littered with countless files, each one containing hundreds of pages of information. Good thing he had clones to help. Naruto imagined that this was how being Hokage generally operated. There was a lot of responsibility involved, but also a lot of fulfillment. Finishing with the last file, Naruto leaned back in his chair. The two clones that were helping him sort through information wiped the sweat from their brows, then dissipated in a cloud of smoke. The window across the room was slightly open. A gentle wind blew, ruffling the pile of papers on his desk just enough for him to hold them in place. Kimiko was seated at the edge of his table, tail wagging lazily in the air. She watched him with those piercing eyes, almost as if demanding a snack. Naruto chuckled and gently scratched her chin. I'll get you something to eat. Promise. It was times like these that he loved. Just being able to relax and enjoy the passage of time. A bittersweet feeling weighed on his heart. The more time he spent here, the less connected he felt to the elemental nations, and the very thought of leaving all he'd built in Japan made him frown. Then don't leave. Kurama's voice rumbled through him. Don't leave? Huh. That's weird. Weren't you the one telling me not to get attached to this place? Yes, I was. However, it's far too late for that now, isn't it? Naruto looked down. Yeah. So, stay. He leaned forward in his chair. I can't. Why? Because I feel obligated to help. Naruto remained silent. Look, Naruto. I'm not telling you to stop trying to find a way home. What I am saying is that once you kick that Uchiha's ass, do whatever the fuck you want. You aren't obligated to stay and help them. Leave the rebuilding to those that remain. Wow. So talkative today. Shut up. Naruto chuckled to himself. I understand, though, Kurama. It seemed like all his life had been laid out for him, without him having a say. Kurama had been sealed in him against his will. He had been forced to become strong to protect himself from the Akatsuki. He had to learn Fuinjutsu, Sage Mode, and Baijuyo Mode, all for the sake of saving the world. He'd been the child of prophecy since birth. He had no say in that. But here, in Japan, he did have a say. He'd learned medical ninjutsu of his volition. He'd built something he could be proud of. He'd met many wonderful and not so wonderful people. But these were his choices. No one else's. So, perhaps Kurama was right. Once he defeated Sasuke, he had no reason not to return to Japan. I won't tell you what to do. Just think about it. Afterwards, Naruto's thoughts drifted to the new demon under his roof. Yahaba. Presently, he was asleep. Susumaru was keeping an eye on him downstairs. Naruto still had a seal that restricted movements placed on the demon. As much as he'd like to believe that the same change that occurred in Susumaru could be replicated in others, he was no fool. Yahaba would be monitored strictly. Maybe even more so than he'd done with Susumaru. Still, it fascinated him. Most demons wanted nothing but to devour him, but a select few seemed to respond positively to his blood. I don't believe your blood physically changes people, not like Muzan's, Tamayo had said. What it does do, perhaps, is give demons the strength to change themselves. But only if they desired to. Mukago was a primary example of someone who had only wanted to eat him, not change. A knock on the door made Naruto look up. Moments later, Yuichiro entered. Sorry if I'm interrupting, Naruto, the teen said. But there's someone outside that's looking for you. Naruto perked up. He hadn't been expecting visitors. Who? Yuichiro shrugged. Some demon slayer with a weird wooden box. He says Miss Tamayo sent him. The blonde tilted his head, but nodded. Okay, let him in then. What's this about? Naruto wondered. Yuichiro went to fetch the unexpected arrival. When he returned, the first thing Naruto noticed was the green, checkered Haori. The teen stepped in, ushered by Yuichiro. And truth be told, he did have a wooden box, one worn like a bag. A black Nichiren blade glinted dimly, held in place by his white belt. The Demon Slayer Corps uniform was on full display, a sight that immediately reminded him of Shinobu. The most notable feature on this young man was the scar that extended across his forehead. He also looked injured, judging by his posture. Hello, are you Naruto Uzumaki? The Demon Slayer finally asked. Naruto smiled. The one and only. And you are? He bowed his head. Tanjiro Kamado, sir. Whoa, whoa. Naruto chuckled. No need for the sir. Just call me Naruto. He'd been tense earlier, but relief seemed to flow into Tanjiro. He rubbed his burgundy hair. Oh okay, Naruto. Come on, take a seat. Anui, please get him something to drink. Yuichiro nodded without protest and left, leaving Naruto alone with the young demon slayer. Tanjiro tentatively took a seat across from Naruto. He gently removed the box from his back and placed it in front of him on the floor. Naruto's eyes snapped to that box, brow arching with intrigue. So, you met Tamayo? Tanjiro nodded quickly, nervously. Yes. She told me to come see you as soon as possible. You're aware that she's a demon? Another quick nod. Yes. Naruto leaned back in his chair. But you're a demon slayer, aren't you? Isn't interacting with a demon against your philosophy? When it came to this issue, Tanjiro sat up straight. It's true that I am a demon slayer, he said. My job is to decapitate any demons I come in contact with. I trained for it. I was given this sword to take their lives, to avenge the souls of those they killed. His eyes were firm as he spoke. Still, for those demons who truly regret their past, for those demons who suffer and struggle to right their wrongs, I will not overlook the actions they take to make amends. And sure, Miss Tamayo might have done bad things in the past. But now, she helps people. She takes care of the sick. She's trying her best to cure all demons. She really has changed. Naruto grinned. I see. You're certainly different from other demon slayers I've met. With that, I suppose I can trust you not to go attacking my friend. Your friend? Tanjiro glanced around. Oddly, he sniffed the air, then seemed confused by something, glancing around. You mean a demon, right? The blonde nodded. Yeah. Miss Tamayo told me that you lived with a demon, that you might be able to help me with something. The box in front of Tanjiro suddenly began to shake. The teen placed a hand on the fine wood, hoping to soothe what lay within. But the shaking continued, and loud scratching sounds could be heard. Naruto's eyes locked on the wooden item once again. "Nezuko, what's wrong?" Tanjiro inquired, patting the box. The shaking intensified, growing more violent. "Nezuko." He looked concerned, stooping down to open the box. Naruto was genuinely surprised to see a girl emerge from the enclosure. She possessed pale skin and pink eyes. Her dark hair was long, reaching down to her waist, tinted orange at the tips. She looked similar in appearance to Tanjiro, too. So, siblings, perhaps. But the most notable thing about her was the bamboo muzzle in her mouth. And she was drooling. Realization struck Naruto in that moment. This Nezuko girl was a demon. Yet he hadn't sensed a lick of negative emotions from her. "Nezuko, Nezuko." The demon girl was shaking, shuddering violently as she returned to her original size. Tanjiro was holding her back. Nezuko's eyes snapped to Naruto, and her shivering intensified. Her nails sharpened into claws, she clenched her fists tightly, blood began to drip onto the wooden floor. Saliva continued to dribble from her mouth. Her brows furrowed tightly as she continued to stare at him, irises now slitted like cats. For Naruto, this wasn't anything new. For Tanjiro, however, this was a disaster. I am sorry," blurted the teen. He used all his power to hold her back. "She normally isn't like this. She'd never hurt a human. Never." Nezuko, despite Tanjiro's hold, took a step toward Naruto, shuddering so much that her brother could barely keep a firm grip around her shoulders. It was then that Yuichiro returned with the drinks. He froze at the bizarre scene unfolding before him. "It's all right, Tanjiro," Naruto soothed. "I'm sure Tamayo mentioned something about my blood." He stood from his chair and went to close the window across the room, plunging the office into complete darkness, so as not to hurt Nezuko. By the time Naruto turned back to both siblings, he saw something that genuinely touched his heart. Nezuko was crying. Wet, fat drops stained her cheeks, dripping down her chin. Angry tears. As though she was disappointed in herself. "Yuichiro," Naruto said softly. "Do me one more favor, please. Go get Susumaru. And